Hello, welcome to Gardeners'World. I'm just planting this Lychnis floss cuculi, the white robin that I bought at Malvern, and already it's mixing in. Floss cuculi means cuckoo flower. It flowers when the cuckoo calls. And I've heard the cuckoos circling around Longmeadow most days this week. And of course this time of year, which is my favourite, it's got to be the best moment in the year, is so rich with flowers and leaf and birdsong, and it's growing and unfurling almost by the hour. Everything's looking fantastic, and yet there's so much more to come. On tonight's show, Carol is celebrating one of the most spectacular and colourful trees of spring.
Magnolias are amongst the most ancient flowering trees on the planet. Palest pinks, deep magenta, immaculate white. These magnificent flowers announce that spring has well and truly arrived.
Rachel takes a trip down memory lane with her mother and revisits a garden that made a lasting impression on her.
This says coconut to me. This is exactly what I remember, these big single blocks of colour.
And I shall be adding some kale to the vegetable garden in two very different ways, as well as planting clematis in the cottage garden. Come on. Now, as part of the transformation of the vegetable garden into a cottage garden, and of course cottage gardens include vegetables, so I'm not ditching them, I'm adding some clematis. I always feel that clematis have that loose abundance that adds a softness to any border. And of course the cottage garden, by definition, is soft in flower. But the key thing is, you don't have to grow a clematis up a wall or a fence or into a tree. You can grow them in a border. Now, I do this in a couple of ways. The easiest way is just to make a support, like this wigwam of hazel bean sticks. And of course, by planting into a border, the clematis will climb up and you've got your flowers at eye height. And it takes the eye up, it adds height, adds drama, adds architecture, with all the qualities of a clematis on a wall. Now, whatever clematis you plant, and wherever you plant it, you need a decent-sized hole. And it's worth going to some trouble to do this. Okay, that will do. Now, you'll see that that is actually a much bigger hole than the pot that this is contained in. So really something about 3 or 4 times as big. And that's to allow room to put in plenty of organic material, because clematis love a nice, cool, free root run and masses of food and drink. And compost and a bit of leaf mould do the job perfectly. Now, this is Clematis Viticella abundance, and I've chosen it for the sort of cherry pink because I want to try and introduce as many pinks as possible. Now, this is late flowering. It means that it will start to flower at the end of June and in July. And I'm going to bury it quite deep, which is a good rule of thumb for all clematis. The worst thing you can do to a clematis is let it dry out. They like cool, moist roots. So when you plant any clematis, give it a really good soak, and then water it once a week until it's growing well or unless the ground is wet. 3 gallons of water, and it will drink every last drop. Now, I will be planting up the rest of the wigwams, but I'm also going to put some clematis just into the border. This is Clematis gerandii. It's got a fabulous, rich blue, slightly violet flowers. And because it doesn't cling, it needs something to sprawl on, and a shrub is ideal. You can grow clematis through shrubs really easily. This is Rosa complicata. And as the complicata finishes flowering, the gerandii will begin. And it's just another way of incorporating clematis into a normal flower border. Now, I'm really confident that these will be smothered in flower from July onwards. But if you want to see flower right now, none are better than magnolias. What a year it's been for them. And Carol has been to a garden with a fabulous collection.
Every year, but especially in a year like this, all gardeners are impatient for the spring. They're just dying for it to arrive. But then suddenly, magnolias burst upon the scene. Palest pinks, deep magenta, immaculate white. Magnolias are amongst the most ancient flowering trees on the planet, more than 20 million years old. And here at Marwood Hill Gardens, they're bringing the whole place to life. Dr. Jimmy Smart started to develop this 20-acre garden in North Devon in the 1950s to showcase his collection of magnificent trees. Head gardener Malcolm Farrow has promised to show me the magnolias, the highlights of the collection. And I love the way that you can just, see everywhere you walk. I mean, this valley lends itself, doesn't it?
It does. You go up the top of the hill and you can look down on the garden and there's all the magnolias planted out for you to see.
At one time, there wouldn't have been magnolias in English landscapes, were they? The first ones were American, weren't they?
The first ones came from America, from Virginia. But of course, another 100 years after that, they start discovering them in the Asiatic countries, China and up in the Himalayas.
Can you just imagine coming over the top of the mountain and seeing something like this?
Well, that's right. This is Magnolia lobneri murrel. It's a hybrid. One of the parents is stellata.
So how long's this one been here?
Well, this has been here about 50 years. In fact, it was planted by the doctor before he built the house. So, being very much a plantsman, he built the house around the plant.
Yeah.
But it's such a wonderful thing, these lovely scented white flowers.
This is what you call a magnificent tree.
Well, this is the pride and joy of the garden. This is Magnolia Marwood Spring. And the parent of it came from China.
It was Ernest Wilson, wasn't it? They called him Chinese Wilson, the wonderful plant explorer who introduced most of the magnolias we know.
That's right. He went off to China and see all these provinces of China, found all these wonderful magnolias, brought them back. And this is the progeny from it. Beautiful reddish flowers as it comes out.
These wonderful trees are very large. But there are magnolias more suitable for smaller gardens. I've loved them all my life, and I've got a couple at Glebe Cottage. Well, this is my Magnolia stellata. I've always wanted one, and I planted it more than 30 years ago, soon after we came here. It's called stellata because the flowers are star-like and they fling their petals back. I love it when it's in bud too and you anticipate all that beauty to come. One of the most common misconceptions about magnolias is that they demand acid soil. Well, providing your soil is reasonably fertile, and in most cases, most magnolias will grow. People think that you can't prune magnolias, but not a bit of it. Providing you do it during the dormant period, when the sap is as low as it possibly can be, it'll respond wonderfully the next year. Most of us associate magnolias with the spring, but there are species and cultivars that extend the season for months and months, and I'm going to plant one of them. This is Magnolia parvifolia, otherwise known as Seboldii. It has beautiful, graceful white flowers, slightly pendulous with a deep pink centre, and it flowers in the summer. I think it's going to be brilliant here. I've dug it a really good hole, nice and generous, and I've lined it with very, very rotted old muck. Ernest Wilson, who introduced so many of our very best magnolias, said of them, "No other genus of hardy or half-hardy trees can boast so many excellences." I think that says it all.
These are brassica plants that I sowed from seed. What's the date these were sown? The 23rd of March. They're now ready for planting out. In fact, these are Cavolo Nero, which I love. These are a black Tuscan kale, and you can eat them in salads when they're this size. You can let them grow big and have them in stews and soups and make fabulous pasta sauce. Really one of my favourite cabbages, because that's effectively what they are. But normally, with the whole brassica family, you plant them into soil that's been well firmed. But obviously a raised bed like this, you can't firm down. The whole point about it is that it's soft and got a really loose root run, which goes against most ways of growing any type of brassica. So I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment. I'm going to grow some in a normal bed, in the conventional manner, and I'll just compare the two and see how they grow. Now, in terms of planting out, very, very simple. This is a good size. You can see that that's a nice, healthy root system in a plug, good plant like that. And all I have to do is just make a hole and pop it in. If I plant it deep and firm it in fairly well around it, that should be fine. And brassicas include cabbages, kale, cauliflowers, Brussels sprouts, turnips, and rocket. And they're all in the same family. Now you can see the spacing for this is quite close as far as cabbages go. Normally you will be looking to have double that spacing, but I want to eat these when they're young because I'll sow another batch for eating over winter. So I'm planting a grid. I'm going to let these plants only get about that big and then keep picking the leaves while they're young and tender. As well as being hungry, they're thirsty, so they will need watering fairly regularly. Right, that's the raised bed batch. Now, the second lot, I want to go into a conventional bed so I can compare the two. Now, these two beds are what you might call standard vegetable plots. So I will plant some Cavolo Nero in them the way that I normally would. The first thing to do is just rake off the soil, and they will benefit from that. The next thing to do is to firm the soil. So just walk over it. So we're firming the soil exactly as though we were laying turf. And then rake that over again. And plant into that. Now I won't be able to use my fingers. I firmed it properly, so I need a trowel. And firm it really securely, which is very much the conventional way of growing any brassica plant. So I'll use the same spacing so we can make a decent comparison. Well, there's two different ways of planting. One in a raised bed, using the lightness and the fluffiness of the raised bed, and another where the soil has really been tamped down firmly. We'll see. We'll see which works best. Now, if you live in an area where cabbage root fly is prevalent, it's a good idea to put some sort of mat around the base of the young plants. Let's put it around that one like that. Now, these are simply cardboard squares. You can buy them. You can make them out of roofing felt, cardboard. And the whole point is the fly will come along and lay its eggs at the base of the plant. In this case, it will lay it on the cardboard, and then they should dry out and won't have a chance to go into the soil where they hatch and eat the roots of the plant. Well, that's an experiment. But you may not be planting cabbages this weekend, but here are some other things that you can be doing. It's time to plant out sweet peas. The ground should have been well dug with lots of compost added to it, and there must be some kind of support for the peas to clamber up. I sow 3 seeds to a pot and then plant the whole pot at the base of each stick. However you do it, plant them deeply and then water them in really well. And don't worry if you don't see any signs of growth for the first week or so, because the roots will be establishing from the day you put them in the ground. Biennials, such as wallflowers or foxgloves, grow their roots and foliage in their first growing season and then flower the following spring or summer. And now is the ideal time to sow many of them. This can be done outside in a seed bed just as successfully as in a greenhouse. Prepare a piece of ground by raking it to a fine tilth. Then and sow the seed thinly in rows, labelling them clearly. Water them well and make sure they are kept weed-free. The best way of keeping on top of weeds in the vegetable garden is with a hoe. Try and hoe little and often, and preferably before the weeds get bad. Always hoe on a dry day so that the cut weeds can dry out and the roots won't re-establish in wet soil. Like so many things this year, the tulips are terribly late. Normally they're at their best the end of April, and here we are at the middle of May, and there's still lots to come. But their quality doesn't seem to have diminished at all as a result of the cold weather. They're still as stunning as ever. In this pot, I've got Flaming Parrot, which is an enormous goblet of a flower, and then Aladdin, which is lily-flowered, same colours but different shape. Just igniting the garden. And all flowers before tulips warm things up and they unfold and they've got subtlety and delight, but tulips come along and just put a match to the whole thing. And I love that burst of energy. Now, we've got lots in this garden, but absolutely nothing compared to the garden that Rachel and her mother have been to visit in Holland.
The Dutch bulb growing area just southwest of Amsterdam is a truly extraordinary sight. Right in the heart of this Technicolor wonderland is Keukenhof, the world's biggest spring garden. The garden is only open for 2 months of the year, but for that brief moment, it's truly dazzling.
Wow. Well, I don't remember this at all.
Goodness, and so many people.
I first came here with my mum more than 40 years ago, and it made a lasting impression on me. And now we're retracing our steps to see if we can recapture some of that magic.
Was this what you remember?
No. But then I don't remember anything anyway, as you know. You're the one who remembers. And can you remember 40 years ago?
I can remember it, but I don't remember this, because this is beautiful. Look at this.
This is lovely. This is so different, isn't it?
The ivory flowers of Tulipa turkistanica work beautifully with the pale yellow concerto tulips. And they're underplanted with blue and white smaller woodland bulbs to give a freshness that would lift any semi-shaded spot.
Still can't believe it's 40 years ago. We don't look any different.
Well, I don't know. Some of us have grown one way or another.
Hey, see, this says Keukenhof to me. This is exactly what I remember, these big single blocks of colour. You certainly can't ignore it, can you? I think this was very formative for me, this visit, because I remember it so vividly. I was 9, and I remember I was just so bowled over by what I saw.
When I remember Keukenhof, I remember the tulips. But now I see it's so much more than that. Not only are there breathtaking collections of narcissi, mascari, and hyacinths, there are also fantastic combinations of an even wider range of bulbs.
Mum, look.
What?
Tulipa tarda.
Oh, my goodness, that's what your father
That was
loved.
Dad's favourite, wasn't
Yes, it really was.
So beautiful. Now, what do you think of this?
I think it's fantastic. It's really so beautiful and very, very simple. Just such a quantity of
Well,
stuff.
it's just the 2 varieties. I think that's why it works, because they haven't put too much into it.
That's
But
right.
You see, you wouldn't see this anywhere else.
No.
I think it's fantastic. I'm going to take some pictures.
I tell you what, Rach, you take your pictures. I'm going off to see the orchids in that pavilion, and I'll meet you
Right.
outside there.
I'll
okay?
have a little wander, and I'll about 15 minutes.
Lovely.
And one thing is mystifying me, that all the flowers, I mean, these are great, big, heavy flowers.
Right.
All of them absolutely standing to attention. None of them are flopping over.
Beautiful, isn't it?
How are you doing that?
Well, that's our magic trick. By the hyacinths, we give them a little support with some iron stick.
Ah, okay.
You want to try yourself?
Yes, definitely.
You put it on the side of the hyacinths, just and down there, and
Oh,
you
yeah?
go into the soil.
But not into the bulb, just
Not in the
on
bulb,
the
yeah.
side. Right, so the stake goes down through these flowers, down the side of the stem, and then slightly to the side of the bulb.
And that's what we do with the hyacinth. We'll stand there for 1 or 2 weeks more.
A succession of clever bulb combinations like this can give months of vibrant colour. Crocuses have already given way to muscari. Then the hyacinths come into bloom, and all this happens before they're joined by the first of a myriad of tulips. Kokenhof is pure fantasy made real. Its scale is beyond reach, but it's certainly an inspiration, come the autumn, to fill the garden with combinations of bulbs for a succession of glorious colour.
I think for me the most interesting thing today has been seeing how what I like has changed. And what I remember when I was little is not necessarily what I think I'd remember now. From this visit, I've loved it. I've had a very good day.
That's good.
I guess that kind of highly controlled formality is the exact opposite of the writing garden here, which I want to appear to be as loose and as informal as possible. And to achieve that effect, I've got lots of bulbs and lots of perennials, but as yet no annuals. And some I've sown under glass and I'm raising and ready to plant out in a week or two, but hardy annuals, on the other hand, can be sown direct. Now, there are two ways of doing this. Either I can just broadcast the seed, which obviously is about the easiest bit of gardening you could ever do, and poppies are very well adapted to this. So you can just take the seed and cast it on the surface of your soil. Just take a handful of seed here, and this is a variety called white cloud. And bearing in mind this is fundamentally a white garden with a little bit of pink, that's suited. Now I've just got a few seeds, and if I sprinkle them like that, I'm not controlling where they go at all. But obviously that random feel is exactly what I want here in this type of garden. Now that is probably the easiest gardening anybody could do. Although I have to say that all annuals are incredibly easy. I mean, they are such an important branch of plants.
They're really useful for filling gaps. And whilst poppies need light to germinate, many other hardy annuals need to be covered over with soil. And here's a tip how best to sow them in a border amongst other plants.
First do, choose an area that's reasonably open, like we've got here, and just gently rake it so it's smooth and make sure there are no weeds. And in fact, we might go in there too. So we have a little runway for plants. And then make a shape which is recognizable. Now, obviously, the simplest shape is just to draw a line like that. But you could do a cross. You could make a circle. The whole point is that when these seedlings do germinate, you will see where they are, because a weed seedling doesn't grow in any prescribed or preordained shape. And whilst that may seem terribly artificial and unnatural, you then thin them and you'll be amazed at how natural they will look. And you can do this in a number of places all over the border. So, for example, I've got a white nigella here. It's called African Bride. So, very, very simply, a line like that, and we'll go off there. And of course, these will come up when the tulips are long gone. So I'm trying to think of succession coming through. Nigella has the ferny foliage and the looseness that I want in this garden. And I accept I'm not going to get it straight away. You have to work at these things. And this is where annuals come in, because you can change them. Doesn't work this year, you can try something different next year. You could make a whole garden this size entirely out of annuals for really very little money. Right, we have the seed there. So I've made my line, and I will just sow the seed in there. carefully. And obviously, the thinner I do it, the less I'm going to have to thin it out, and the more locations I can put the seed in. That's probably plenty. Cover that over. Right, Nigella. That will go in there. And then as the seedlings emerge, yes, they'll be competing with weed seedlings, but because they're in a straight line, I can carefully take out the ones I don't want, and then when I know they're growing nice and strongly, thin them so that they look natural. Believe me, it works. Well, that's it for this week, and we shan't be here at Longmeadow next week because it's Chelsea. But I'll see you back here in a fortnight's time. So until then, bye-bye.